He helped an old man fix his tavern. The veteran and dog got more than a job. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's begin the story. In a quiet, forgotten corner of the town, where the wind howled through the cracked windows and the smell of stale wood lingered in the air, stood a small, aging tavern. It wasn't much, just a little brick building with a faded sign hanging loosely above the door. The paint was peeling, and the windows were streaked with years of neglect. Yet, for those who remembered, this tavern had once been the heart of the town, a place where the laughter of friends and the clink of glasses filled the air every evening. But now, it stood abandoned, much like the man who owned it. George, an old veteran, was the last to remember the tavern's former glory. He was in his late 60s, his hair mostly silver now, with wrinkles that told the story of a life filled with struggle and loss. George had served in the army many years ago, but those days felt like a lifetime ago. His hands were worn, calloused from decades of hard work, but the fire that had once burned in his eyes was fading. The tavern had been his dream, his pride and joy, but after the death of his wife and the loss of his only son in a tragic accident, the tavern became just another reminder of what he had lost. Now, it was only a shadow of what it had once been. That was until Jake, a former soldier just like George, walked into town. Jake had seen his fair share of hardship. After returning home from the war, he found himself lost, drifting from town to town, unable to shake the memories of the battlefield. He was looking for something, a purpose, a place to belong, but he wasn't sure what. His dog, Max, a loyal German shepherd, had been by his side through it all, offering comfort and companionship when the world seemed too dark. Jake had been wandering for days when he found himself standing in front of the tavern. At first, he thought it was just another abandoned building, another place that time had forgotten. But something about it called to him. He stepped inside, and the musty smell of old wood and stale beer hit him immediately. The place was dimly lit, with dust hanging thick in the air. The bar, though worn and chipped, still had character. It was clear that someone had once cared for this place. And there, behind the bar, sat George, the old man who had once poured drinks for countless patrons. He looked up from his work, his tired eyes meeting Jake's. Without a word, Jake walked over and offered his hand. "Need some help?" he asked. George looked at him for a long moment before nodding slowly. He had no idea why, but something about Jake made him believe that maybe, just maybe, this old tavern still had a chance. Jake didn't just come to work. He came to fix more than just the broken furniture. Over the next few weeks, Jake worked tirelessly, fixing the roof, repairing the floors, and cleaning up the bar. Max, his faithful dog, was always by his side, providing comfort and companionship as Jake worked. The two of them made a great team, and as the tavern began to take shape, so did the bond between Jake and George. They talked about everything, their lives, their losses, and their dreams for the future. And it wasn't just the tavern that started to change. Jake, too, felt a shift within himself. With each day spent working alongside George, he began to feel a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was someone who had a purpose. As the tavern slowly came back to life, George noticed something strange. The more work Jake did, the more he seemed to bring with him, a quiet strength, a steady resolve. Jake wasn't just fixing a building. He was fixing himself, and in the process, he was breathing new life into the old tavern. Little did Jake know, his decision to help George would lead to something far greater than he could ever have imagined. Not only did he restore the tavern, but he also uncovered something hidden beneath the floorboards, something that would change both their lives forever. What started as a simple act of kindness would soon become a journey neither of them could have predicted. As Jake continued to work alongside George, the transformation of the tavern was more than just physical. It was as if the building itself was starting to breathe again, coming alive with every nail hammered and every board replaced. The once dilapidated structure now had a new vibrancy to it, and so did Jake. He found a sense of peace in the routine of his work, something he hadn't felt in years. Each morning, As the sun rose over the sleepy town, Jake would arrive at the tavern with Max by his side, ready to tackle another day of repairs. George, who had been hesitant at first, had begun to trust Jake more and more. He could see the way the younger man's presence had brought a lightness to the tavern that hadn't been there in years. But there was still a heaviness in George's heart. The memories of his wife and son haunted him, especially in the quiet moments when he would sit alone at the bar, staring into his drink. Yet, there was something comforting about Jake's steady presence, and in those moments, George would find himself telling Jake stories of the tavern's past, of the nights filled with laughter, music, and warmth. Over time, the tavern began to attract a small but loyal group of regulars. Word spread through the town that George's old place was finally open for business again, and people slowly began trickling back in. The atmosphere was different now, warmer, more welcoming. There was a feeling of hope in the air, and it was clear to everyone that something special was happening. Jake didn't just fix the tavern, he had fixed the very heart of it. As the days passed, Jake's bond with George grew stronger. They began to spend more time together outside of the work, talking about everything from their shared experiences in the military to their hopes for the future. Jake had come to realize that, like him, George was a man searching for a way to heal, to move on from the wounds of the past. One evening, after a long day of work, George invited Jake to sit down with him for a drink. The bar was quiet, save for the soft crackle of the fire burning in the hearth. Max was curled up at their feet, content after a long day of watching over the tavern. "You know," George said, his voice low, "this place has been my whole life. I built it with my own two hands, and when my wife and son passed, it felt like I lost everything. I didn't know how to keep going." Jake nodded, understanding the pain behind George's words. "I get it," he said. "Sometimes, it feels like the weight of everything is just too much to carry." George looked at him, his weathered face softening. "But you know, I think you've given me something I didn't even realize I needed. You've brought this place back to life. And more than that, you've brought me back to life." Jake's eyes met George's, a quiet understanding passing between them. "I didn't do it alone," Jake said, his voice steady. "I had a good team. Max, this place, we all worked together." George smiled faintly, his eyes glistening with emotion. "It's more than just the repairs, Jake. It's about the way you've helped me see that life doesn't stop. Even after all the pain, there's still more to be lived." Jake was silent for a moment, letting the weight of George's words sink in. He realized, for the first time in a long while, that he had found something worth fighting for again. The tavern wasn't just a job. It was a new chapter in his life, a place where he could finally let go of the darkness that had haunted him for so long. The next day, as Jake and George went over the final touches of the tavern, Jake found something strange beneath the floorboards. He had been working on an old section of the bar when he noticed the floor was unusually loose. With some effort, he pried up a few of the floorboards, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, wrapped in old cloth, was a wooden box. Curiosity piqued, Jake carefully opened it, and inside, he found an assortment of papers, a few dusty old coins, and what appeared to be a map. George, who had been watching from across the room, walked over slowly. "What is that?" he asked, his voice filled with curiosity and a hint of apprehension. Jake examined the map closely. "I think it's a treasure map," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "A treasure map? Are you sure?" George asked, his eyes narrowing. Jake nodded. "It looks like it. This could be something huge, George. Something that's been hidden here for years." George's face softened. "I never expected to find anything like this," he said, his voice quiet. "But maybe it's a sign that the tavern wasn't just meant to be a place for drinks and memories. Maybe it's meant for something more." Jake looked at the map again, the possibilities racing through his mind. Whatever this treasure was, it was clear that it had been waiting for someone to find it. And now, that someone was him. As Jake stared at the old, weathered map, his fingers tracing the faded lines, a sense of wonder and uncertainty began to settle in. The tavern had already given him more than he ever expected. A purpose, a place to belong, and a friendship with George that had begun to heal wounds he thought would never close. But this was something entirely different. It wasn't just a job anymore. It was a mystery, a hidden secret buried beneath the very floorboards of the tavern that had brought him back to life. He looked over at George, who was standing silently, his old eyes narrowing with curiosity. "What do you think this is?" Jake asked, his voice a mix of excitement and disbelief. George's face softened as he stepped closer, peering down at the map. "It looks like something from the old days. I remember my father telling stories about buried treasures, about things left behind for someone worthy to find. But I never thought much of it." Jake's heart began to race. This could be the breakthrough he had been waiting for, the moment that could change everything. He stood up, brushing the dust from his hands. "We need to find out where this leads. It could be something huge." George hesitated for a moment, his gaze lingering on the map. "Jake, this tavern has always been my family's legacy. If there's something hidden here, maybe it's meant to stay hidden. Maybe the past is better left where it is." Jake felt a pang of doubt, but he quickly pushed it aside. He had spent too many years running, too many years lost in the darkness of his own mind. This was a chance for something more, a chance for him to step into the light. "We won't know unless we try," Jake said, his voice steady. "Besides, I'm not just fixing up this tavern for the sake of it. There's more here, something that's been waiting for someone like me." George looked at him, his expression softening. "All right, Jake, we'll give it a shot. But be careful. The past can be a dangerous thing to dig up." With that, the two of them set to work, following the map's instructions. It wasn't an easy task. The map led them to a hidden room beneath the tavern, a small, dark space that hadn't seen the light of day in years. The air was thick with dust, and the walls were covered in old, crumbling bricks. But Jake wasn't deterred. He moved methodically, carefully pulling back the floorboards where the map had indicated. His hands shook with anticipation as he uncovered a small wooden chest, its surface worn with age. "This is it," Jake whispered, almost to himself. "This is what we've been looking for." George watched from a distance, his arms crossed as he stood in the doorway. "Be careful, son. We don't know what's inside." Jake nodded, his heart racing as he opened the chest. Inside, he found stacks of old documents, coins, and jewelry, all carefully packed away, as if waiting for someone to claim them. But there was something more, something that caught Jake's eye. Beneath the coins and papers, hidden at the bottom of the chest, was a small, intricately carved box. Jake's hands trembled as he reached for it. He opened the box slowly, revealing a delicate gold key. "What do you think this is for?" Jake asked, turning to George, who had stepped forward to get a closer look. George's face paled as he stared at the key. That's the key to the cellar," he said quietly. "My father always told me that it was special, that it was meant to be used for something important. I never knew what he meant." Jake's eyes widened. "The cellar? What's down there?" George shook his head slowly. "I don't know, but my father always warned me not to go down there. He said it was better to leave the past where it was." Jake felt a surge of curiosity. He had already uncovered so much. But now, the idea of the cellar, the one place George's father had warned him about, was too tempting to resist. "We have to go down there," Jake said, his voice firm. "This could be the key to everything." George looked torn. He had always trusted Jake, but the thought of opening a door to something that had been sealed for so long made him uneasy. "I don't know, Jake. This could be dangerous." Jake turned to him, his expression resolute. "We've come this far, George. We can't stop now. The past is part of who we are, but it doesn't have to control us. It's time to face it." With that, the two of them descended into the dark cellar, the flickering light of their lantern casting eerie shadows on the stone walls. The air was damp, the musty smell of old wood and earth filling their nostrils. Jake led the way, the gold key in his hand, his heart pounding in his chest. They reached the heavy wooden door that had been locked for as long as George could remember. With a steady hand, Jake inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The door creaked open, revealing what lay beyond. What they found would change everything. The cellar was filled with more than just old barrels and forgotten crates. It held secrets, things that had been buried for years. And as they stepped inside, they knew they were about to uncover something that would forever alter the course of their lives. As the door creaked open, the dim light from their lantern revealed the vastness of the cellar. The air was thick with dust, and the musty scent of old wood and earth clung to everything. Jake and George stood at the entrance, the weight of what they were about to uncover pressing down on them. The flickering flame from their lantern cast long shadows on the stone walls, giving the space an eerie, almost haunting feeling. Jake took a deep breath, his heart racing with anticipation. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment that could change everything. With a steady hand, Jake stepped forward, his boots crunching on the old wooden floorboards. George followed closely behind, his steps slow, as if he was unsure of what lay ahead. "I never thought I'd be back here," George muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Jake didn't respond. His attention was fully on the space before them. The cellar was filled with old crates, barrels, and forgotten relics of a past long buried. But what caught Jake's eye was the far wall. It was covered in shelves, each one stacked high with dust-covered objects. Some of them were clearly ancient, covered in layers of dirt and cobwebs. But there was one item, sitting alone on a small wooden table, that stood out. It was a large, old chest, the wood dark and weathered with age. The brass clasps were tarnished, but they still held the chest shut, as if guarding whatever secrets it held inside. Jake approached it slowly, his hands trembling with the weight of what it might contain. George, too, seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. "I never knew about this chest," he said softly, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. "It must have been here for decades." Jake reached for the chest, his fingers brushing against the cool wood. With a soft grunt, he managed to pry open the brass clasps and lift the heavy lid. As he opened it, a cloud of dust escaped, and the smell of old parchment filled the air. Inside the chest were piles of aged letters, maps, and what appeared to be journals, all neatly stacked and wrapped in faded cloth. But as Jake moved the papers aside, he found something even more intriguing, an old key. This key was unlike any he had ever seen before. It was large, made of brass, and engraved with intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story of their own. Jake picked it up, his fingers tracing the delicate carvings. "What do you think this is for?" he asked, holding it out to George. George took the key, examining it carefully. His expression grew even more serious as he turned it over in his hands. "That's the key to the vault," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "My father told me stories about it, but he always said it was meant to be kept a secret. He said whoever found the key would be chosen for something greater." Jake's heart skipped a beat. This was the vault that George's father had mentioned, the vault that had been hidden away for years. The thought of what it might contain sent a chill down his spine. "Do you know where it is?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. George nodded slowly. "It's in the back of the tavern, under the floorboards. It's been sealed for as long as I can remember." The realization hit Jake like a wave. The vault was right beneath their feet, hidden away in the very place they had been working so hard to restore. And now, with the key in hand, they were one step closer to unlocking the secrets that had been buried for generations. "Let's go," Jake said, his voice filled with determination. He stood up, the key still clutched tightly in his hand. George followed him, his footsteps echoing in the silent cellar. They made their way back up to the tavern, the weight of the key heavy in Jake's pocket. The tavern, which had been a place of pain and loss for so many years, now felt different. It felt like it was about to reveal its deepest secret. As they reached the back of the tavern, George led Jake to the corner near the old fireplace. There, the floorboards were slightly uneven, as if something had been hidden beneath them. Jake knelt down, his hands working quickly to pry the boards loose. As the final board came free, they were greeted by a small metal door, the kind that was usually hidden from view. Jake inserted the key into the lock and turned it, feeling a satisfying click as the door creaked open. What lay beyond was something neither of them had ever expected. Inside the small room was a collection of old, forgotten treasures, coins, jewelry, and artifacts, some of which were hundreds of years old. But what stood out the most was an ornate chest, covered in dust, but clearly well-maintained. Jake reached for it, his heart pounding in his chest. He opened the chest slowly, revealing an assortment of documents, each one more carefully preserved than the last. At the very top of the stack was a letter, yellowed with age and written in an elegant hand. As Jake carefully unfolded the letter, he began to read, the words slowly coming into focus. The letter spoke of a great inheritance, a fortune passed down through generations, and a promise that had been made long ago, one that was now finally coming to fruition. The letter concluded with a simple statement: "The chosen one will know when the time has come." Jake looked up from the letter, his eyes wide with realization. He had found it. This was the moment. Whatever the future held, he knew that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. The letter that Jake had found in the chest seemed to pulse with a hidden energy as he held it in his hands. The words on the paper were more than just ink on aged parchment. They felt like a message from the past, speaking directly to him. As he read the letter aloud, George stood nearby, his face solemn as if trying to piece together the history of the family that had once owned this tavern. "The chosen one will know when the time has come," Jake read, his voice steady despite the rising tension in the room. "That's it. That's what it says." George's face hardened as the weight of the words sunk in. "My father always told me the tavern had a greater purpose, but I never understood what he meant. Now it's clear. It's you, Jake. You've been chosen." Jake's heart began to race, and for the first time, the full significance of everything they had uncovered settled upon him. It wasn't just about fixing a broken tavern. It wasn't just about finding a treasure. This was something deeper, something that tied him to this place and to the legacy of George's family. "But why me?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just a guy who came here looking for work, looking to fix something in my life. I don't know anything about this family's legacy or whatever this treasure is." George sighed deeply, his eyes clouded with memories. "I don't know why it's you either, Jake. But maybe, just maybe, the work you've done here, the way you've breathed life back into this place, is the answer. You've brought this tavern back from the brink of ruin. You've brought it back to life. And maybe, just maybe, this legacy is yours now. Maybe it was always meant to be." Jake didn't know how to respond. The idea of being the heir to a legacy he hadn't asked for, one that carried the weight of generations, was overwhelming. But as he looked around the cellar, at the tavern, and at George standing beside him, something shifted inside him. This place had given him a purpose, a reason to keep going, and it felt like it was giving him one final gift, a chance to become someone better than he had ever been. Jake stood up, the letter still clutched in his hand, and walked toward the small staircase that led back into the tavern. George followed him, silent, the heavy atmosphere of the cellar still clinging to them both. They emerged back into the tavern, the sound of the wind whistling through the cracks in the walls filling the air. Jake took a moment to look around. The tavern, though still old and worn, now felt like something different, a place of possibility, a place where dreams could still be realized. He turned to George, who was standing beside him, looking out across the room. "What happens now?" Jake asked. George paused for a moment, as if considering the question. "I guess that depends on you, Jake. What do you want to do with this place?" Jake didn't have to think long. "I want to make it a place people can come to share their stories, to feel welcome. I want to give it a future, something that's worthy of the past." This tavern was never just about the drinks or the food. It was about community, about bringing people together. And that's what I want to do. I want to bring people back here, to give this place a second chance. George smiled faintly, a look of pride in his eyes. "That's the spirit, Jake. You've got the heart for it. Just remember, it's not just about the tavern. It's about what you build with the people around you." Jake nodded, feeling a deep sense of purpose welling up inside him. He had come to this town looking for a job, for something to anchor him. Now, he had found something far greater, a family, a history, and a chance to make a difference. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and discovery. Jake, with George's help, began to make plans for the tavern's future. They started by cleaning up the main room, fixing the broken windows, and replacing the faded sign outside. But Jake didn't stop there. He wanted to bring something new to the tavern, an event space, a place for storytelling and music, a place where the community could gather and share their lives. It wasn't long before the word spread. The tavern, once abandoned and forgotten, began to attract people from all over the town. Old faces returned, their memories of the past reigniting as they stepped through the doors. And new faces appeared too. People who had never been to the tavern before, drawn by the rumors of a place where something special was happening. Jake was amazed at how quickly the tavern was coming back to life. But it wasn't just the physical changes that amazed him. It was the way the community had embraced him, had welcomed him into their lives. They didn't see him as the outsider anymore. He was one of them now. One evening, as the tavern filled with the sounds of laughter and music, Jake stood at the bar, watching the people around him. The transformation had been nothing short of miraculous. He had come here to fix a broken place, but in the process, he had fixed himself. He had found a home, a purpose, and a family. And as he looked around at the people he had helped bring together, he knew this was only the beginning. The tavern, and everything it represented, was just the first step in a journey that was far greater than anything he could have imagined. There were still secrets to uncover, still mysteries to solve, but for the first time in a long time, Jake felt ready to face whatever came next. As the weeks passed, Jake and George worked side by side, breathing new life into the tavern. The place was bustling with energy now, the sounds of laughter and music filling the air every evening. It felt like the heart of the town was beating once more, and Jake was proud of the role he had played in that transformation. But even with all the progress, there was still a lingering question that refused to leave Jake's mind. The treasure, the vault, the mystery hidden deep within the tavern. He had found the key and unlocked a piece of the past, but what would the rest of this hidden legacy reveal? George had grown quieter as the days went by, as though the weight of everything they had discovered was starting to settle on him. Jake could tell that the old man was still processing everything. The inheritance, the vault, the things his father had kept hidden. But George never spoke much about it, instead focusing on the tavern and the people who had returned. Still, every so often, Jake would catch George staring at the map or the letter, his mind clearly elsewhere. One evening, after closing the tavern for the night, Jake sat down across from George. The tavern was quieter now, the last of the patrons having filtered out into the cool night air. The flickering candlelight cast shadows on the walls, giving the room a calm, almost nostalgic feel. "George," Jake said softly, "I think it's time we figure out what this treasure really is. We've come this far, and I know there's more to find." George looked up at him, his eyes tired but thoughtful. "Jake, I've been thinking the same thing," he said quietly. "I don't know what's out there, what my father left behind. But whatever it is, I think we're meant to find it together." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of those words. Whatever lay ahead, whatever secrets the vault held, he knew it was no longer just about the treasure. It was about understanding the legacy that had shaped George's family, and in turn, shaping his own future. The next morning, they gathered the tools they would need to search deeper. The plan was simple: explore the cellar again, this time using the map and the key to guide them to the final resting place of the legacy George's father had hidden away. As they descended into the cellar, the air felt thicker than before, as if the very walls were holding their breath. The light from their lantern flickered, casting long shadows as they made their way to the metal door they had unlocked. Jake held the key tightly in his hand, feeling its weight like a promise, like a thread tying him to the past, and to something greater than himself. They reached the vault again, and this time, they moved with purpose. Jake slid the key into the lock once more, and the door creaked open, revealing a narrow stairwell leading deeper into the earth. They descended into the darkness, each step taking them further from the world they knew and closer to whatever awaited them below. The air down here was cool, damp, and heavy with the scent of earth and old stone. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, the first thing Jake noticed was the large wooden chest sitting in the middle of the room, its surface worn and scarred from age. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. "This is it," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible in the stillness of the cellar. "This is where it all ends." They approached the chest slowly, the tension in the air thickening with each step. Jake's hands trembled as he reached for the latch. He lifted it carefully, the sound of the creaking would filling the silence. Inside, they found more than they could have ever expected: piles of old documents, letters sealed with wax, and small trinkets that looked like they had been carefully preserved for generations. But at the very top of the chest, resting on a velvet cloth, was a small wooden box, its surface engraved with intricate patterns that matched the designs on the key. Jake opened the box slowly, his heart racing. Inside, there was a single item, a small, delicate pendant, made of silver and adorned with a single sapphire stone that seemed to catch the light from their lantern. Jake held it in his hands, feeling the weight of its significance. This wasn't just a treasure, it was a symbol of everything that had been hidden away, everything that had been passed down through the generations. "This is it, isn't it?" Jake said softly, looking up at George. George's eyes were wide as he stared at the pendant, recognition flashing across his face. "Yes," he whispered. "That pendant, it's the key to everything. My father always said it would find its way back to the right person." And now, I see. It was meant for you, Jake. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The pendant was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was the final connection to the legacy George's family had carried for so long. It was the key to the past, and it was Jake's now. What does it mean? Jake asked, his voice filled with awe. George took a deep breath, his expression serious. It means that you've inherited more than just a tavern, Jake. You've inherited a family's history, its legacy. This pendant, it's a symbol of everything that has come before us. And now, it's yours to carry forward. Jake held the pendant tightly in his hand, feeling its weight settle in his palm. The weight of the past, the responsibility of the future. He knew that whatever came next, whatever challenges they would face, he was ready. This was more than just a treasure. It was his future, his place in the world. The tavern was just the beginning. What lay ahead was the true legacy of George's family, and now it was his to protect and carry forward into the world. The days that followed were filled with a quiet sense of purpose. Jake held the silver pendant tightly in his hand, feeling its weight anchor him to a legacy that was now his to carry forward. He had come to this town seeking a new start, a place where he could heal from the scars of his past. What he had found was far greater than anything he could have imagined. Not only had he restored a forgotten tavern, but he had also unlocked the secrets of a family's history, and now, that history was his responsibility. As he stood in the tavern, staring at the pendant, George approached him slowly. The old man's face was thoughtful, his eyes carrying the burden of a past that he had kept hidden for so long. You know, Jake, George began, his voice low and steady. This tavern was never just a place for people to drink. It was a symbol of our family's strength, our bond with this town. My father built it with his own hands, and he always said it was meant for someone who could carry on his work. Jake looked at him, his heart heavy with the weight of the responsibility now resting on his shoulders. I don't know if I'm the right person for this, Jake said quietly, the uncertainty in his voice clear. I never asked for any of this. I was just trying to find a place to belong. George smiled, his eyes softening. I understand. But sometimes, life has a way of bringing us exactly where we're meant to be. You've done more for this place than anyone ever expected. You've breathed life back into it, and now it's your turn to carry it forward. Jake nodded slowly, still feeling the enormity of it all. The pendant in his hand felt like the key to something bigger, something he couldn't quite see yet. What happens now? He asked, looking up at George. Now, George replied, you take the next step. You rebuild this place not just for the people who come here, but for the future. This tavern, this legacy, it's yours now. The words echoed in Jake's mind as he stood in the empty tavern, the quiet hum of the past surrounding him. He thought about the people who had come and gone, about the laughter and the stories shared over drinks, about the history that had been forgotten and now was being revived. It wasn't just about fixing a building anymore. It was about building something that would last, something that would serve as a reminder of what had come before and what was yet to come. As Jake turned to face the bar, his eyes were drawn to the walls, to the old photographs and the faded memories. This was his new home now, his new purpose. He wasn't just a drifter anymore. He was a part of something bigger. And as the days went by, he began to see that it wasn't just the tavern that was changing. It was the entire town. Word had spread about the tavern's revival, about the man who had brought it back to life. People began to return, not just to drink, but to share stories, to connect with each other. The tavern became a place of community once again, a place where memories were made and old wounds began to heal. Jake worked tirelessly, often with George by his side, restoring the tavern to its former glory. They fixed the roof, repainted the walls, and replaced the old furniture. But it wasn't just the physical repairs that mattered. It was the spirit of the place that was being restored. As the tavern began to fill with patrons once more, Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was his life's work. The pendant in his pocket, the key to the vault, the legacy, it was all part of something bigger than him. And as the tavern doors opened to welcome more and more people, Jake knew that this was only the beginning. One evening, as the sun began to set and the tavern filled with the sounds of conversation and laughter, Jake stood behind the bar, looking out at the familiar faces. The town was changing, and so was he. The man who had once felt lost, alone in the world, had found his place, his purpose. And as the night wore on, Jake smiled to himself. The legacy of George's family, the history of this place, was no longer something hidden in the past. It was alive, living and breathing in every conversation, every drink, every story shared. Jake had found a new family in this town, and he had found his true calling. The pendant in his pocket was more than just a reminder of the past. It was a symbol of everything he had overcome and everything that was yet to come. The future was waiting, and Jake was ready to embrace it. As the weeks turned into months, Jake's life continued to transform in ways he had never expected. The tavern was no longer just a building. It was a thriving, living place, full of energy and warmth. Every evening, the bar filled with people, old faces who had once abandoned the place and new ones who were drawn in by the stories of its revival. The music played, laughter echoed through the rooms, and the smell of home-cooked meals filled the air. The once dusty corners now held the voices of a community coming together, all thanks to Jake's determination and the legacy he had inherited. But despite all the changes, there was still something stirring in the back of his mind, a question that had been left unanswered since he found the pendant and the key. What was the true purpose of the vault? What was his father's hidden legacy meant to be? George had grown more distant over the last few weeks, absorbed in his thoughts as he tried to make sense of the treasure they had uncovered. His father's legacy was a heavy burden, one that George had never fully understood, and now that it had fallen into Jake's hands, he wasn't sure what to make of it. "Jake," George said one evening as they sat together after closing time, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you sooner." Jake looked up from his glass, surprised by the seriousness in George's voice. "What's going on?" "It's about the vault," George began, his gaze drifting to the floor. "My father kept a lot of things hidden. He always believed that some things were too precious to be shared, too dangerous to be uncovered. And now, I think it's time we both understood why." Jake listened intently, his curiosity piqued. "Why? Now?" "Because," George said, his voice heavy, "the vault isn't just about the family's fortune. It's about something more. My father believed that whoever found the key, whoever was worthy of the legacy, would also be responsible for protecting something far more valuable than gold or silver." Jake's heart raced. "What do you mean?" "There's a secret," George said quietly. "A secret my father never shared with anyone. The vault was never just about wealth. It was about power. There's something hidden down there, something powerful enough to change everything." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He had never considered the vault to be anything more than a family heirloom, something to be passed down through the generations. But now, as George spoke, it felt like they were standing on the edge of something much deeper, something that could alter the course of their lives. "We have to go back down there," Jake said, determination in his voice. George hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I've been thinking the same thing. I've been waiting for the right moment to tell you. But now, I think you're ready. You deserve to know the full truth." That night, they descended back into the cellar, the air colder than usual, as if the very walls were holding their breath. The lantern light flickered as they made their way to the hidden door, the one that had once been sealed tight. Jake inserted the key into the lock, feeling the weight of his responsibility pressed down on him with each turn. The door creaked open, and they stepped into the narrow passageway that led deeper into the earth. The darkness seemed to stretch on forever, the silence pressing in around them. As they reached the vault once again, Jake's heartbeat quickened. They had already uncovered so much, but what lay ahead could be something entirely different. He turned to George, who was standing silently behind him, his face grim. "Are you sure about this?" Jake asked, his voice barely a whisper. George nodded, his eyes steely. "I'm sure. But know this, Jake, what we find down there could change everything. It's not just about the past. It's about the future. And once we open it, there's no going back." With those words hanging in the air, Jake stepped forward, his hand resting on the door. He turned the handle, and the heavy wooden door swung open with a low creak. Inside, the vault was larger than he had imagined. The space was filled with old chests, crates, and barrels, all stacked high, as though waiting for someone to unlock the mysteries they held. But at the center of the room was something unexpected, a pedestal upon which sat a single, ornate box. The box was made of dark wood, its surface inlaid with intricate designs. Jake's breath caught in his throat as he stepped forward. The box seemed to radiate a sense of power, an energy that felt almost palpable. "What is this?" Jake whispered, reaching out to touch it. "That," George said, his voice tinged with awe, "is the heart of the legacy. My father believed it was meant for the one who could protect it. And now, Jake, that responsibility is yours." Jake hesitated for only a moment before lifting the box from the pedestal. As he opened it, a flash of light filled the room, and inside, he found a strange, glowing stone. The stone seemed to pulse with energy, its color shifting in the dim light. "What is this?" Jake asked, his voice shaking. "That," George said softly, "is the key to everything. It's the source of the power my father spoke of. And now, it's yours to protect. But remember, Jake, power like this comes with a cost. You have to decide how you'll use it." Jake stared at the stone, his mind racing. The responsibility, the power, it was more than he had ever imagined. And as he held the stone in his hand, he knew that this was just the beginning. The tavern, the legacy, and now this strange, glowing stone. It was all leading him to something bigger than he could understand. But one thing was clear, his life would never be the same again. As Jake stood in the dimly lit vault, the strange glowing stone cradled in his hands, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at the crossroads of his life. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on his chest, and for the first time since he had stepped into this town, he wondered if he was truly ready for what was ahead. George, who had remained silent since Jake had lifted the stone, now stepped forward. His face, though calm, bore the weight of years of secrets and expectations. "Jake," he said softly, "this is the moment we've been waiting for. My father entrusted the legacy to us, but it's you who has the power to decide what happens next." Jake turned the stone over in his hands, the light from the lantern casting shifting shadows on the walls. The stone pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, as if it had a life of its own. It was beautiful and strange, yet it felt like a heavy burden. "I don't understand," Jake admitted, his voice low. "What is this thing? What do I do with it?" George took a deep breath, his expression serious. "The stone is not just a relic. It's part of the legacy that has been passed down through generations. My father always said that the one who was worthy would be chosen to carry it, and with it, the responsibility of protecting something far greater than gold or power." Jake's mind raced, but he still couldn't grasp the full meaning of George's words. "What is it protecting?" he asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. George looked at him, his eyes reflecting both pride and fear. "It's not just about what's hidden here, Jake. It's about the balance of the town, the people, and the land. The stone is a source of energy, a power that must never fall into the wrong hands. My father knew the risks, which is why he kept it hidden away for so long." Jake took a step back, the magnitude of the situation starting to sink in. "And now it's my responsibility?" "Yes," George said simply. "You've restored the tavern, brought people back to this place, and helped bring the community together. You've proven yourself worthy of the legacy. But with this comes a price. The stone's power can be used for good, but it can also be corrupted. The choice is yours. You decide what path to take." Jake's hands tightened around the stone. His entire life had been about survival, about finding peace and a place to belong. He had never asked for power, and now it was thrust upon him. He didn't know if he was ready to carry this burden. The weight of it seemed too much to bear. "How do I know I'm doing the right thing?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. George placed a hand on his shoulder, a rare gesture of comfort. "There's no clear answer, Jake. It's a path you must walk for yourself. You'll have to decide what kind of man you want to be, what kind of legacy you want to leave behind." Jake stood there, feeling the stone's warmth against his skin, its power pulsing in time with his thoughts. For a moment, he felt a sense of clarity, as if everything he had done had led him to this exact moment. The tavern, the community, the history, it was all connected, and now it was his turn to shape the future. He could feel the weight of the choice ahead of him, but for the first time in a long while, he wasn't afraid. With a steady breath, Jake made up his mind. "I'll protect it," he said, his voice firm. "I'll carry this responsibility, and I'll make sure it's used for good. This town, this tavern, it's where I belong, and I won't let it fall into darkness." George nodded, his face showing a mixture of relief and respect. "You've made the right choice, Jake. The power of the stone may be great, but the heart of this place is stronger. As long as you keep that in mind, you'll lead us well." With those words, Jake placed the stone back into the box and closed it, feeling the weight of the decision settle into his bones. He knew this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, difficult choices to make, and forces that would test his resolve. But he was ready. The tavern had become more than just a place to work. It had become a symbol of everything he had fought for, a new beginning, a chance at redemption, and now, a future that he would shape with his own hands. The days that followed were filled with a renewed sense of purpose. Jake and George worked together to strengthen the tavern, but this time, it was more than just physical repairs. They focused on strengthening the foundation of the community as well. People came from near and far to visit, not just for the drinks, but for the sense of belonging they found there. The tavern had become a place of hope, of shared stories, and of healing. But even as Jake worked to build something beautiful, he knew that the true test had yet to come. The stone was still in his possession, its power still untapped, and there were others who would stop at nothing to take it for themselves. Jake had chosen the path of protection, but it wouldn't be an easy journey. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he was ready to face them head-on. The legacy was his now, and with it came the responsibility to guard it for future generations. As the sun set behind the tavern, Jake looked out at the horizon, his heart filled with determination. This was just the beginning of a new chapter in his life, and he was ready for whatever came next. The weeks that followed Jake's decision to protect the legacy were filled with a mixture of excitement and dread. As much as he felt certain of his choice, the responsibility was not one that could be taken lightly. The tavern, which had become a symbol of hope for the town, now represented something far more powerful than he had ever imagined. The stone, still locked safely in the ornate box, weighed heavily on his mind. He could feel its energy, its presence, like a constant pull, reminding him of the task ahead. It wasn't just about maintaining the tavern anymore. It was about protecting a power that could change the course of history. At night, Jake would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he was truly prepared for what lay ahead. The tavern had brought him so much: community, purpose, even family. But now, with the stone in his possession, he realized it was much more than he ever bargained for. The power it contained was something he couldn't fully comprehend, but he knew it could be dangerous. There were whispers in town, rumors of strange occurrences, people talking about the mysterious energy surrounding the tavern. Jake tried to ignore the talk, focusing instead on the day-to-day operations, but deep down, he knew something was coming. One evening, as Jake was closing up the tavern, a stranger entered. His presence was unsettling, and the cold air seemed to follow him as he stepped inside. Jake had never seen this man before, but there was something about him that sent a chill down his spine. The man walked slowly toward the bar, his eyes scanning the room, as if he were looking for something. "Good evening," the stranger said, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. "I hear this is the place to be if you're looking for answers." Jake studied him carefully, his instincts on high alert. "I'm afraid we don't deal in answers here," Jake replied, his voice steady but cautious. The man smiled, a slow, knowing smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, I think you do. I think you know exactly what I'm looking for." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Jake's hand instinctively went to his pocket where the key to the vault and the stone were safely hidden. The man's eyes flicked to Jake's hand, then back to his face. "You're not the first to try and protect it," the stranger continued, "but you will be the last." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He knew exactly what the man meant. The stone. It was why he was here. The stranger wasn't just looking for answers. He was after the power. "Who are you?" Jake asked, his voice low, trying to maintain control of the situation. "Someone who knows exactly what you've found," the man replied, his eyes cold. "And someone who will do anything to take it from you." Jake stood up straighter, his eyes narrowing. "You're not getting it." The stranger's smile faded. "You don't understand, do you? That stone has the power to change everything. And there are people far more dangerous than you can imagine, who will stop at nothing to claim it. You don't know what you're dealing with." "I know exactly what I'm dealing with," Jake said, his voice hardening. "And I'll protect it with everything I've got." The stranger's expression darkened. "We'll see about that." With that, he turned and walked out of the tavern, leaving a cold silence in his wake. Jake stood there for a moment, the weight of the encounter sinking in. This was only the beginning. He had always known there would be challenges, but he hadn't anticipated how dangerous they would become. The power of the stone wasn't just a local secret. It was something that people would kill for. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He paced the tavern, thinking about the stranger's words. There was so much he still didn't understand. Who was this man? And who else was out there, searching for the stone? What if they found it first? The next day, Jake and George met in the back room of the tavern. The atmosphere was tense. Jake recounted the stranger's visit, his voice low, as if the very mention of the encounter could invite more danger. George listened intently, his face grave. "This is what I feared," George said, after a long silence. "The power of the stone has attracted attention from people who will stop at nothing to get their hands on it. We knew the risks, but now it's real." Jake ran a hand through his hair, frustration building inside him. "What do we do? How do we protect it if people like that are out there?" George sighed deeply. "We have to be careful. The stone must remain hidden, at all costs. If the wrong people find out about it, they will destroy everything we've worked for." Jake nodded, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. He couldn't let the tavern, the people, or the town fall into the wrong hands. "We can't let them take it," Jake said, his voice firm. "I won't let them." George looked at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of concern and pride. "Then we must be prepared. Whatever comes next, we face it together." Jake looked around the tavern, his heart pounding in his chest. This place, the people who had come to call it home, they were worth fighting for. He wasn't going to let anyone take that away from him. As he turned back to George, a sense of resolve settled in. The fight for the stone had only just begun, and Jake was ready to protect it, no matter the cost. The days following the stranger's visit were filled with a sense of urgency that neither Jake nor George could ignore. They knew the stakes had risen, and the peace they had fought so hard to rebuild was now under threat. The tavern, once a quiet refuge, had become the center of something much larger than either of them had anticipated. The stone was no longer just a family heirloom. It was a beacon, calling to those who sought its power. Jake spent the days strengthening the tavern's defenses, keeping watch for any more strangers who might appear, while George began to dig deeper into his father's old journals, searching for answers about the stone, its true purpose, and any hidden protections it might have. They were no longer just caretakers of a tavern. They were the guardians of a powerful secret, and they had to be ready for whatever came next. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, George called Jake into the back room. His expression was grim, his face illuminated by the flickering light of the lantern. "I found something," George said quietly, holding up a weathered journal that had clearly seen better days. "Something my father wrote about the stone. I think it's time we understood what we're truly dealing with." Jake stepped closer, his curiosity piqued. George carefully opened the journal, his fingers brushing the pages as he turned them. "My father was always cautious with his words," George continued. "But here, in the margins, he left a note. The stone holds not just power, but the key to the land's life force. It must be protected, for when the time comes, the one who carries it will have the ability to shape the world." Jake's stomach twisted. "Shape the world? How?" George closed the journal, his eyes distant as he tried to process his father's cryptic message. "I don't know, but I think this is why we've been chosen, why the tavern has been so important. It's more than just a place. It's connected to the stone, to the very land itself. My father must have known that someone would come along to carry it, to protect it, and he must have been waiting for the right time." Jake felt the weight of those words settle heavily on his chest. He had come to the tavern looking for a fresh start, but he had found much more than that. This wasn't just about building a life for himself. It was about protecting something far more significant. The power to shape the world, as George's father had written, felt like an incredible responsibility. "But what if we're not ready?" Jake asked, his voice tinged with doubt. "What if the power is too much for us to control?" George looked at him, his gaze steady. "That's the question, isn't it? What will we do when the time comes?" My father believed the one who carried the stone would know what to do when the moment arrived. And I think that moment is closer than we realize. Jake clenched his fists, feeling a surge of determination. The stranger's words, the sense of danger lurking just beneath the surface, they had all led him to this moment. He had chosen to protect the stone, to stand guard over the tavern and everything it represented. But now, with the knowledge of its power, the weight of that choice was even greater. We need to prepare, Jake said, his voice resolute. If the time is coming, we have to be ready for whatever happens. That evening, Jake and George made a plan. They would not only continue to restore the tavern, but also strengthen its defenses. They knew that the stone had already drawn the attention of dangerous people, and there was no telling what other threats would emerge. They would need to be vigilant, protect the tavern at all costs, and prepare for the inevitable moment when the stone's true power would be revealed. As the days went by, Jake found himself unable to shake the feeling that something was on the horizon. The whispers around town grew louder, rumors of strange happenings and mysterious figures appearing in the shadows. People were starting to talk, and Jake could sense that the world outside the tavern was beginning to shift. But despite the growing tension, there was something else, something stronger, that kept Jake grounded. The community. The people who had come together in the tavern, who had found solace and connection in the very place he had worked so hard to restore. They were a reminder of why he had chosen this path. It wasn't just about power. It was about protecting something that was bigger than any one person. The tavern, the town, and the people. These were the things worth fighting for. One evening, as Jake stood behind the bar, looking out at the familiar faces, he realized that the moment had arrived. He could feel it in the air, the tension, the anticipation. He didn't know exactly what was coming, but he knew he was ready. The stone, the power, the legacy, it was all part of something far bigger than he could fully understand. But he had made his choice. He would protect it, no matter the cost. The future of the tavern, the future of the town, depended on it. As the door swung open and a new group of patrons entered, Jake met their gaze, a quiet resolve settling within him. The path ahead would not be easy, but it was his to walk. And no matter what happened, he would face it with everything he had. As the days grew darker and the tension in the town thickened, Jake and George continued their quiet preparations, reinforcing the tavern's defenses and guarding the legacy they both knew was at the heart of the town's future. The stone pulsed softly in its box, its power ever present, a constant reminder of the responsibility Jake had taken on. The tavern, once a place of community and simple refuge, had become something much larger than he had ever imagined. It wasn't just a business anymore. It was the last line of defense against those who sought the stone's power, and Jake was determined not to let it fall into the wrong hands. But as the months passed, it became clear that they weren't the only ones watching. The stranger's visit had been just the beginning. Word had spread, and with it came more threats. People who didn't just want to take the stone, but were willing to do anything to claim its power. Jake had received strange letters, cryptic messages, and even threats scrawled on the tavern's walls. It was becoming increasingly clear that the town was no longer safe. The quiet, peaceful life he had come to love was slipping away. Despite the growing danger, Jake continued to focus on what mattered most, the community that had formed around the tavern. It was the one thing he knew he could rely on. As much as the threats loomed large, he believed that the bond between the people who came through the tavern's doors was stronger. Together, they had built something that went beyond the walls of the tavern, something unshakable. But even with that, Jake knew it wouldn't be enough. Something had to be done. He couldn't sit back and wait for the next attack. One evening, as the air grew cooler and the wind howled outside, Jake called George into the back room. The tavern had quieted down for the night, the usual hum of conversation replaced by the flickering of the fire in the hearth. George stepped in, his face tired but determined. "What's on your mind?" George asked, taking a seat across from Jake. Jake didn't hesitate. "We need to do more than just hide the stone. We need to find a way to protect it for good." George leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "We need to take the stone somewhere safe," Jake said, his voice steady. "Somewhere one can find it." George's eyes widened, as if he had been expecting this moment, but wasn't ready to hear it. "Jake, we've talked about this. The stone has a connection to this land. It's tied to the tavern, to the people here. If we move it, who knows what will happen? It could destroy everything." Jake's heart pounded, but he stood his ground. "I know the risks, George, but we're running out of time. The longer we wait, the more dangerous this gets. We can't just hide behind the walls of the tavern forever." George sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're right. I don't know where to go. My father never mentioned anything about a place where the stone could be safe. He only talked about protecting it here." Jake could see the uncertainty in George's eyes, the same fear that had been growing in his own chest. The weight of their decision was immense. "We need to find the answers," Jake said quietly. "And we can't do it alone. If we're going to protect this town, we need to ask for help." George sat back, his eyes narrowing. "Help from who?" "There's a place," Jake said slowly. "A group of people who've dealt with this kind of thing before. They know how to protect things like the stone. They've done it for centuries." George looked at him with suspicion. "You're talking about them, aren't you? The secret society." Jake nodded. "They're the only ones who can help us. I don't like it either, but we don't have a choice. If we don't act fast, we'll lose everything." George was silent for a long moment, the weight of Jake's words settling heavily between them. Finally, he spoke. "All right, let's do it. We'll find them." The next day, Jake and George left the tavern together, the stone carefully hidden in Jake's bag. They didn't know exactly where they were going, only that they had to find the society that could help them protect it. The town, once so familiar and safe, now felt like a distant memory as they drove farther and farther from the place they had called home. It wasn't just the stone they were protecting anymore. It was everything that had come to define their lives. The people, the tavern, the legacy. They had to protect it, no matter what. Hours later, they arrived at an old, forgotten building at the edge of a dense forest. The windows were dark, and the structure appeared abandoned. It was as if time itself had ignored this place, leaving it to rot in isolation. Jake and George exchanged a look, both uncertain, but knowing there was no turning back now. They stepped out of the car, and as they approached the building, a door creaked open. Standing in the doorway was a figure, cloaked in darkness, the figure they had come to find. "You've come," the figure said, his voice low and steady. "You seek protection for the stone." Jake's heart pounded in his chest. They had made it, but he had no idea what lay ahead. This was it, the moment that would determine the future of the tavern, the stone, and everything they had fought for. They had no choice but to follow this mysterious figure into the unknown, to place their trust in the hands of those who had spent centuries guarding secrets far greater than any they had ever imagined. The figure in the doorway stood still, his cloak shifting in the cool breeze that cut through the forest. Jake and George exchanged uncertain glances before stepping forward, the weight of the stone pressing down on them like a heavy burden. The air around them seemed to pulse with the same energy they had felt since the moment they uncovered the stone. As they approached, the figure stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter. "Come inside," the figure said in a voice that was both soothing and commanding. They hesitated only for a moment before walking through the doorway. Inside, the building was dim, lit only by the flickering light of candles that lined the walls. The space was old, the air thick with the scent of dust and age, as if time had stood still here. They followed the figure through a narrow hallway that led to a large, circular room. The stone walls were covered in strange symbols, and at the center of the room stood an altar, upon which lay a book. The figure moved toward the altar, turning to face them. "You have come seeking protection," he said. "But protection is not what you will find here. What you seek is something more, something that can only be unlocked when the time is right." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard rumors of secret societies, of ancient orders that guarded powerful relics, but he had never imagined he'd find himself in one of their hidden sanctuaries. The figure reached for the book, opening it to a page that seemed to shimmer with an ethereal glow. "The stone you carry is no ordinary artifact," he said, his voice resonating with a deep knowledge. "It is the key to the balance of this world. It can shape reality, change the fate of those who wield it, but it must be handled with care." Jake stepped forward, his voice filled with determination. "I want to protect it, to ensure it's used for good." The figure nodded slowly. "You've already made the right choice by seeking help, but the power you now hold comes with a great responsibility. The moment you chose to keep the stone, you became part of something far larger than yourself. There are others who will come for it, others who believe they can control it. You must be ready for them." "Who are they?" George asked, his voice steady, though Jake could see the fear in his eyes. "They are those who would use the stone's power for their own gain," the figure said, his gaze unwavering. "They have been searching for it for centuries. Some are from your world, others come from beyond, from places you cannot imagine, and they will stop at nothing to claim it." Jake's heart raced. He had always known the stone was powerful, but he hadn't understood the full extent of what it could mean. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice urgent. The figure turned the page of the book, revealing a map that seemed to pulse with light. "You must take the stone to the place where its power can be sealed away forever. There is a temple hidden deep in the mountains, where the stone can be locked away, protected from those who would use it for evil." Jake looked at George, who nodded slowly, his face grim. "We can do this," George said, his voice resolute. "We've come this far. We'll see it through." The figure looked at them both, his expression softening. "You are brave, but the journey will not be easy. There will be trials, dangers you cannot predict. The stone will test you. But if you remain true to your purpose, if you protect what matters most, you will succeed." With that, the figure stepped back, gesturing to the door. "Go now. Your journey awaits." Jake and George turned toward the exit, the weight of their mission settling in. As they stepped outside, the cool night air felt different, charged with anticipation, with the knowledge that the fate of everything they had worked for rested on their shoulders. The path ahead was unknown, but Jake knew one thing for certain. He would protect the stone, no matter what it took. As they made their way back to the car, the landscape around them seemed to shift, the shadows growing longer, the world around them changing. The stone pulsed in Jake's bag, a constant reminder of the power they carried, and the responsibility that came with it. The journey would be long, and the dangers were real. But Jake felt ready. He had faced the unknown before, and he was determined to face it again. This time, however, the stakes were higher. With the stone in his possession, he was no longer just a man trying to rebuild his life. He was a protector, a guardian of a power that could change the world. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Jake would fight to protect what he had found, no matter the cost. Veteran stories have always captivated audiences, especially those that blend suspense, mystery, and the hero's journey. In this gripping tale, a veteran who once served in the military finds a new mission, protecting an ancient and powerful stone hidden within a forgotten tavern. As he works to restore the tavern, a symbol of his past, he unravels secrets that tie him to a legacy larger than he could ever imagine. With every challenge that arises, from mysterious strangers to ancient societies guarding dark powers, this veteran must decide how far he's willing to go to protect what matters most. As the story unfolds, it delves deeper into themes of power, responsibility, and the choices one must make when facing unimaginable odds. Veteran stories like this remind us that heroes are not born. They are made through their struggles and decisions. The tension builds, and the veteran finds himself on a journey to a hidden temple, where the stone's true power must be sealed away before those with malicious intentions can take control. These veteran stories often explore not just physical battles, but internal ones, as the hero confronts his doubts, fears, and the weight of his responsibility. In the end, the veteran discovers that his true strength lies in his ability to protect the people and the legacy he cherishes, no matter the cost. This tale is one of courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable will of a veteran determined to secure his future and the future of those he loves. Veteran stories like these are timeless, resonating with anyone who has faced adversity and fought for a cause greater than themselves.